The galaxy was a canvas painted in the stark hues of war. Not a quick, decisive conflict, but a grinding, agonizing stalemate that had stretched on for decades. The Xylar, a race of stoic, insectoid beings with a rigid caste system, were locked in a death grip with the KRYLL, a bioengineered hive mind known for their relentless aggression and insatiable hunger for territory. Star systems have been reduced to asteroid fields, planets scorched, and countless lives extinguished in a conflict that seemed to have no beginning and certainly no end. Both sides were technologically advanced, their fleets locked in an eternal dance of destruction across the vast expanse of space. Each new weapon was met with an equally devastating countermeasure, each strategic advance neutralized by an unforeseen tactic. The war had become an ingrained part of their cultures, a self-perpetuating cycle of hatred and destruction. Resources were poured into the war effort, economies strained, and societies warped by the constant pressure of conflict. The Xylar, with their structured society, believed they were fighting for freedom and order against the chaotic KRYLL swarm. The KRYLL, in turn, saw themselves as the apex predator, destined to consume and assimilate all in their path, bringing a twisted form of unity to the galaxy. Neither side was willing to yield, convinced of their own righteousness and the other's inherent evil. The galaxy watched, helpless, as the two titans clashed. Neutral systems trembled, fearing the inevitable spread of the conflict. Trade routes were disrupted, economies crippled, and the shadow of war loomed over every corner of known space. Hope was a dwindling resource, replaced by a grim acceptance of the unending conflict. The war was simply a fact of life, a cosmic constant. Until the humans arrived, the vastness of space is often described as a silent void, but in reality, it's a cacophony of cosmic noise. Amidst this background hum, a faint signal, almost lost in the static, flickered across the sensors of the Stardust Drifter. The Drifter wasn't a warship, nor was it a vessel of great importance. It was a simple trading ship, a heavily modified freighter owned and operated by a small, independent human crew. They plied the uncharted routes, trading rare minerals and forgotten technologies between the scattered outposts of the galaxy. Captain Eva Rostova, a woman weathered by years of space travel and hardened by the realities of interstellar commerce, was the first to notice the anomaly. She was a pragmatist, not one for sentimentality, but she possessed a deep-seated sense of curiosity and a willingness to take risks. The signal piqued her interest, not just because of its unusual nature, but also because of its location, far beyond the known borders of explored space, almost on the edge of the galactic rim. "Run it again, Jax," she ordered, her voice raspy from years of recycled air and cheap synth coffee. Jax, the ship's tech specialist, a wiry young man with a perpetually bewildered expression, complied. The signal remained, faint but persistent, a desperate plea echoing across the light years. That IT was a distress call originating from a Xylar outpost under heavy KRYLL assault. Rostova knew the risks. Getting involved in the Xylar-KRYLL war was akin to sticking your hand into a planetary grinder. But the message was clear, the desperation palpable. And something about the Xylar's carefully worded plea resonated with her. They presented themselves as the victims, fighting for survival against an overwhelming force. Rostova, perhaps foolishly, saw them as the underdogs, the righteous defenders of their territory. It was a decision that would change the course of galactic history. A ripple effect that would echo across the stars. Rostova's decision wasn't met with universal acclaim aboard the Stardust Drifter. Her crew, a motley collection of spacers, engineers, and ex-military personnel, voiced their concerns, some more vehemently than others. "Captain, are you out of your mind?" barked Boris, the ship's grizzled chief engineer, his thick accent betraying his Earth-born origins. "We're traitors, not soldiers. We're going to get ourselves killed." Rostova understood their fear. They were a small ship, lightly armed, and ill-equipped to face the full might of the KRYLL war machine. But Rostova was driven by something more than just a desire to make a profit. She had a deeply ingrained sense of justice, a belief in helping those in need. Perhaps it was naive, perhaps it was foolish, but she couldn't ignore the Xyler's desperate plea. "Boris, I hear you," Rostova replied, her voice calm but firm. "But we can't just turn a blind eye. They need our help, and we're in a position to offer it that we may not be soldiers, but we have something the Xyler and KRYLL don't, perspective. We're outsiders, not bound by their centuries-old hatred." She also had a secret weapon, one she hadn't yet revealed to her crew. The Stardust Drifter was more than just a trading vessel. That it was a testbed for experimental technology, a pet project funded by a shadowy corporation back on Earth. Hidden deep within its core was a prototype hyperdrive, capable of instantaneous jumps across vast distances, a technology far beyond anything the Xyler or KRYLL possessed. That it was untested, unreliable, and potentially dangerous, but it was also their only chance. Rostova knew she was gambling with their lives, but she believed the potential reward outweighed the risk. If they could help the Xyler, perhaps they could bring an end to this senseless war. Or, at the very least, they could die trying. With a steely glint in her eyes, Rostova set a course for the Xyler outpost, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. The galaxy was about to witness the arrival of humanity, and nothing would ever be the same. The journey to the Xyler outpost was fraught with tension. The Stardust Drifter, designed for cargo runs, strained under the pressure of near-constant vigilance. The crew, initially skeptical, began to rally around Rostova, their fears slowly transforming into a grim determination. They ran drills, calibrating their outdated weapons and patching up the ship's aging hull. They were going into a war zone, and they knew they had to be ready. As they approached the designated coordinates, the scale of the conflict became horrifyingly apparent. Debris fields, remnants of destroyed ships, and shattered asteroids littered the space around the Xyler outpost. The outpost itself was a battered, crumbling fortress surrounded by a swarm of KRYLL fighters, their chitinous bodies gleaming in the harsh light of battle. "This is it," Rostova said, her voice tight. "Prepare for immediate engagement." The Drifter emerged from hyperspace directly into the thick of the fighting. KRYLL fighters swarmed towards them, their weapons blazing. The Drifter's automated defense systems sprang to life, firing bursts of laser fire, desperately trying to fend off the attackers. The ship shuddered as energy weapons slammed into its shields. "Shields at 60%. Jax shouted from a bridge. "We can't take much more of this." Rostova gripped the arms of her command chair, her eyes fixed on the chaotic scene unfolding before her. This wasn't the clean, heroic image of war she had envisioned. This was brutal, chaotic, and terrifying. The KRYLL fighters were relentless, swarming like insects, their sheer numbers overwhelming the Drifter's defenses. Rostova's initial idealism began to crumble, replaced by a cold, hard realization. She had underestimated the savagery of this war. She had been naive. The Xyler's carefully crafted plea had masked a far more complex and brutal reality. The fight for freedom wasn't as simple as she had believed. Now, she had to get her crew out alive. "Evasive maneuvers," Rostova yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Get us out of here." Boris, despite his earlier reservations, expertly piloted the Drifter through the swarm of KRYLL fighters, dodging laser fire and debris with practiced ease. The ship groaned under the strain, its shields flickering dangerously low. "We can't outrun them, Captain," Boris shouted. "They're too fast." Rostova knew he was right. They were trapped, surrounded by a relentless enemy. But she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She glanced at the console displaying the status of the experimental hyperdrive. The IT was still charging, its energy levels fluctuating wildly. "How long until the hyperdrive is ready, Jax?" Rostova asked, her voice laced with urgency. "Still calibrating, Captain," Jax replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "It's unstable. I can't guarantee a safe jump." Rostova knew the risks. A miscalculation could tear the ship apart, stranding them in the void, or worse, collapsing space around them. But they had no other choice. "Prepare for a jump," "Jax," she ordered. Destination: KRYL-controlled space. Deep inside, her crew stared at her in disbelief. "Captain, are you insane?" Boris exclaimed. "We'll be jumping right into the lion's den." "That's the point, Boris," Rostova replied, her eyes gleaming with a newfound determination. "They won't expect it, but we're going to take the fight to them." She knew it was a gamble, a desperate move born of necessity. But Rostova had seen something in the Karwalel's relentless aggression, a weakness hidden beneath their chitinous armor. They were predictable, bound by their hive mind. They wouldn't expect a small trading vessel to strike at the heart of their territory. It was a suicide mission, but it was also their only chance to turn the tide of the war. And Rostova, despite her initial naivete, was no longer just a traitor. She was a warrior, ready to fight for the survival of her crew, and perhaps the fate of the galaxy. "Brace for jump," Rostova commanded, her voice echoing through the drifter. Red lights flashed and klaxons blared, signaling the imminent activation of the experimental hyperdrive. The ship shuddered violently as the engines strained to contain the immense power surging through them. Jax, his face pale with concentration, monitored the readings, his fingers dancing across the control panel. Hyperdrive charging, energy levels critical, spatial coordinates locked. Outside, the KRYL fighters continued their relentless assault, their laser fire pounding against the drifters' weakening shields. The ship was taking a beating, its hull scarred and blackened. "Jump in 3, 2, Jax announced, his voice barely audible above the din. With a blinding flash of light and a deafening roar, the Stardust drifter vanished from the battlefield, leaving behind only a faint distortion in space. The KRYL fighters, momentarily stunned by the sudden disappearance of their prey, swarmed around the point where the drifter had been, their hive minds struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Inside the drifter, chaos reigned. The ship was tossed about like a rag doll as it navigated the turbulent currents of hyperspace. Alarms wailed, and sparks flew from damaged consoles. The crew clung to their stations, their faces contorted with fear and nausea. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the turbulence subsided. The ship stabilized, and the alarms fell silent. The Stardust drifter had successfully jumped into KRYL-controlled space. "We made it," Jack said, his voice filled with relief. "But I've never seen anything like it. The hyperdrive, it didn't just bend space, it folded it. We jumped across thousands of light years in an instant." Rostova stared at the navigation display, her eyes wide with disbelief. They were deep inside KRYL territory, closer to their homeworld than any Xyler ship had ever been. The experimental hyperdrive had exceeded all expectations, proving to be a game-changer in the war. Humanity now possessed a technological advantage that could shatter the stalemate and rewrite the fate of the galaxy. The implications of their technological leap were staggering. For decades, the Xyler and KRYL had fought a war of attrition, their advances and defenses evolving in lockstep. Every strategic advantage was quickly countered, every technological breakthrough neutralized. The Stardust drifter's hyperdrive shattered that equilibrium. It wasn't just a faster engine. It was a paradigm shift, a complete bypass of the existing rules of engagement. The KRYL, reliant on predictable warp lanes and heavily fortified checkpoints, were utterly unprepared for a ship that could appear anywhere, anytime. Their defenses, meticulously designed to repel conventional attacks, were rendered obsolete. The drifter could slip past their fleets, ignore their minefields, and bypass their planetary shields with impunity. "We could hit any target we want," Jack said, his eyes shining with excitement. "Supply depots, shipyards, command centers, even their homeworld." Rostova considered the possibilities. The power to strike at the heart of the KRYL empire was now within their grasp. They could cripple their war effort, disrupt their supply lines, and bring the KRYL to their knees. But Rostova hesitated. She had witnessed the horrors of war firsthand, the senseless destruction, the unimaginable suffering. She knew that a swift, decisive strike could end the conflict. But at what cost? "What about civilian populations?" she asked, her voice somber. Their homeworld. How heavily populated is it? Jax consulted the data. Extremely. Captain, KRYLL Prime is a sprawling metropolis. Billions of KRYLL live there. Rostova wrestled with her conscience. She had initially been driven by a desire to help the Xyler, to protect the innocent. But now, she faced a far more complex moral dilemma. Could she justify the mass slaughter of billions, even if it meant ending the war? Was she willing to become the very monster she had set out to defeat? The weight of the galaxy rested on her shoulders. The next decision would determine not only the fate of the Stardust Drifter, but also the future of the Xyler, the KRYLL, and perhaps all sentient life in the galaxy. Rostova called a meeting in the Drifter's cramped mess hall. The crew, weary and battle-scarred, gathered around the table, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "I made a decision," Rostova announced, her voice grave. "We're going to KRYLL Prime." A collective gasp filled the room. Boris slammed his fist on the table. "Captain, you can't be serious. That's suicide. We'll be swarmed, annihilated." "I know the risks, Boris," Rostova replied, her gaze unwavering. "But I believe there's a better way to end this war than mass destruction, that we have a weapon they can't comprehend. Empathy, that we're going to KRYLL Prime, not to destroy, but to communicate." The crew stared at her in stunned silence. "Communicate?" Jax stammered. "With the KRYLL? They're a hive mind. They don't understand anything but conquest." "They understand survival," Rostova countered. "And they understand strength. We're going to show them that there's a better way to survive than through endless war. And we're going to show them that there's more to life than just consuming and destroying." Rostova's plan was audacious, bordering on insane. She intended to use the Drifter's hyperdrive to jump directly to KRYLL Prime, bypass their defenses, and broadcast a message of peace directly to the KRYLL collective consciousness. IT was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but Rostova believed it was their only chance to break the cycle of hatred and violence. "I know this is a lot to ask," Rostova said, her voice softening. "But I believe in this crew, that I believe in humanity, and I believe that we can make a difference. Are you with me?" A tense silence hung in the air. Then, one by one, the crew members nodded their assent. Boris, his face still etched with concern, was the last to agree. "All right, Captain," he said with a sigh. "Let's go make some history." Rostova smiled, a glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes. The Stardust Drifter set course for KRYLL Prime, carrying a message of peace to a world consumed by war. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The jump to KRYLL Prime was even more disorienting than their previous voyage. The Drifter materialized in orbit around the planet, the sudden transition leaving the crew reeling. KRYLL Prime was a sight to behold, a vast, sprawling metropolis that covered almost the entire surface of the planet. Towering structures of chitin and metal pierced the atmosphere, connected by a complex network of bridges and tunnels. The sky was a perpetual twilight, choked with the smog of industry and the smoke of countless fires. "We're here," Rostova said, her voice filled with awe and a hint of trepidation. "KRYLL Prime." The KRYLL defenses, caught completely off guard, scrambled to respond. Fighters were launched, orbital platforms activated, and ground-based batteries trained their weapons on the Drifter. But the KRYLL response was disorganized, chaotic. The sudden appearance of an unknown vessel in their home system had thrown them into a state of panic. Their hive mind, accustomed to predictable patterns and coordinated attacks, struggled to process the anomaly. "They're scrambling, Captain," Jax reported. "But they're not firing yet. They don't know what to make of us." Rostova seized the opportunity. "Prepare the broadcast," she ordered. "Let's give them something to think about." The Drifter activated its communication systems, bypassing the KRYLL's encryption protocols and transmitting a signal directly into their collective consciousness. The message was simple, direct, and heartfelt, a plea for peace from species they had never encountered before. IT was a message that would challenge their fundamental beliefs, question their relentless aggression, and offer them a glimpse of a different future. The fate of the galaxy rested on the next few moments. Would the KRYLL listen, Or would they unleash their full fury on the Stardust Drifter, extinguishing the last glimmer of hope for peace? The humans waited, their hearts pounding, as their message echoed through the hive mind of the KRYLL, a single voice crying out in the darkness. The message, carefully crafted by Rostova and her crew, was deceptively simple. IT began with a greeting, a recognition of the KRYLL as sentient beings, worthy of respect, and understanding that IT acknowledged their strength there, determination, and their unwavering commitment to their ideals. But then, it gently questioned the purpose of their endless war. We are the humans. Rostova's voice echoed through the KRYLL hive mind, translated into their complex bioacoustic language. We have observed your conflict with the Xyler, a war that has spanned generations, a war that has consumed countless lives and resources. That we ask you, what is the purpose of this war? What do you hope to achieve? The message then went on to describe the futility of the conflict, the endless cycle of violence and destruction that had left both the Xyler and the KRYLL weakened and scarred. IT pointed out the waste of resources, the loss of potential, and the missed opportunities for growth and progress. You are both strong, both intelligent, both capable of so much more, Rostova's voice continued. But you are trapped in a cycle of hatred and violence, a cycle that will ultimately lead to your destruction. There's another way. There's a path to peace, a path to understanding, a path to a better future. The message ended with a plea for empathy, a call for the KRYLL to see the Xyler not as enemies, but as fellow sentient beings, deserving of compassion and respect. IT urged them to consider the possibility of coexistence, of cooperation, of a future where both species could thrive. As the message echoed through the KRYLL hive mind, a profound silence descended upon KRYLL Prime. The fighters ceased their maneuvers, the orbital platforms powered down, and the ground-based batteries fell silent. KRYLL, for the first time in their history, were listening. The seed of doubt had been planted. The KRYLL were a species defined by their collective consciousness, their unwavering loyalty to the hive, and their relentless pursuit of expansion and assimilation. Empathy, compassion, and understanding were alien concepts, weaknesses to be purged from the collective mind. Yet, Rostova's message, with its simple plea for peace, had struck a chord deep within the KRYLL psyche. The initial reaction was confusion, a dissonance within the hive mind. The KRYLL struggled to reconcile the message of peace with their ingrained instincts for aggression. Doubts began to surface, whispers of dissent spreading through the collective consciousness like a virus. Some KRYLL, particularly those who had witnessed the horrors of war firsthand, began to question the purpose of their endless conflict. They saw the waste, the suffering, and the futility of their actions, the cracks in the KRYLL's warmongering. Society began to widen. Individual KRYLL, for the first time in their history, began to act independently, questioning orders and expressing their newfound doubts. The hive mind, usually a seamless, unified entity, became fragmented, torn between its ingrained instincts and the unsettling message of peace. The KRYLL leadership, sensing the growing unrest, attempted to suppress the dissent. They reinforced their propaganda, amplified their calls for war, and threatened to punish those who questioned their authority. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing rapidly. The KRYLL were no longer a monolithic entity, blindly following the dictates of the hive mind. They were individuals, capable of independent thought and action. Rostova's message had awakened something within them, something that could change the course of their history. The KRYLL were at a crossroads, their future hanging in the balance. That Rostova's message wasn't just intended for the KRYL, that IT was also broadcasting. The Xyler language, across the Xyler territories. The Xyler, a species known for their rigid social structure and unwavering adherence to tradition, had long viewed the KRYLL as an irredeemable enemy, a force of chaos and destruction that had to be eradicated at all costs. They believed they were fighting a righteous war, a battle for survival against an existential threat. But Rostova's message challenged that deeply ingrained belief that IT forced the Xylar to confront their own role in the perpetuation of the conflict. They had demonized the KRYL, dehumanized them, and refused to acknowledge their sentience. They had become so consumed by hatred and vengeance that they had lost sight of their own values. The Xylar leadership, initially dismissive of the human message, found themselves facing growing unrest among their own population. Many Xylar, particularly those who had lost loved ones in the war, began to question the endless cycle of violence. They saw the futility of their efforts, the waste of resources, and the missed opportunities for peace. The Xylar, like the KRYL, were at a crossroads. They could continue down the path of hatred and destruction, or they could embrace the possibility of peace and understanding. That Rostova's message had given them a choice, a chance to break free from the shackles of their past and forge a new future. The Xylar High Council, facing mounting pressure from their people, reluctantly agreed to consider the human message. They authorized a temporary ceasefire, a suspension of hostilities to allow for further analysis and debate. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if the Xylar would embrace the possibility of peace. The moment of truth had arrived. The galaxy held its breath. Across countless star systems, on battle-scarred planets, and orbiting space stations, the guns fell silent. Within 5 hours of Rostova's broadcast, both the Xylar and KRYL high commands, acting independently but with a shared sense of uncertainty, issued orders for a complete ceasefire. The orders were met with disbelief, confusion, and even outright defiance in some quarters. Many soldiers, hardened by years of war, struggled to comprehend the sudden cessation of hostilities. They had been trained to hate, to kill, to destroy. Now, they were being told to lay down their arms, to stand down, to consider the possibility of peace. But the orders were followed, albeit reluctantly. The KRYL, still grappling with the internal dissonance caused by Rostova's message, obeyed the directives of the hive mind, even as doubts continued to fester within their collective consciousness. The Xylar, facing growing unrest among their population, saw the ceasefire as a necessary step, a chance to appease their people and explore the possibility of a diplomatic solution. The 5-hour ceasefire was a fragile truce, a precarious pause in the endless cycle of violence. Both sides remained on high alert, suspicious of each other's motives and wary of a sudden attack. But for the first time in decades, the guns were silent. The stars twinkled undisturbed, the planets spun in peace, and the galaxy breathed a collective sigh of relief. On the Stardust Drifter, Rostova and her crew watched with a mixture of hope and anxiety. They had achieved the impossible. They had brought the war to a standstill, but they knew that their work was far from over. The ceasefire was just the first step. The real challenge lay ahead, convincing the Xylar and the KRYL to lay down their arms permanently and embrace a future of peace and understanding. The fate of the galaxy still hung in the balance. The immediate aftermath of the ceasefire was characterized by deep-seated distrust and suspicion. Both the Xylar and KRYL had been conditioned to view the other as an irredeemable enemy, and decades of war had ingrained that hatred into their cultures. The thought of negotiating with their sworn enemy was anathema to many, but Rostova and her crew persevered. They used their neutrality and unique perspective to facilitate cautious dialogue between the two warring factions. The Stardust Drifter became a neutral meeting ground, a place where Xylar and KRYL representatives could gather to discuss their grievances, air their concerns, and explore the possibility of a peaceful resolution. The initial meetings were tense and unproductive. Accusations were hurled, insults were exchanged, and old wounds were reopened. But Rostova, with her calm demeanor and unwavering commitment to peace, managed to keep the discussions on track. She reminded both sides of the futility of their war, the waste of resources and the suffering it had caused. She emphasized their shared humanity, their common goals, and their potential for a better future. Slowly, gradually, the ice began to thaw. The Xylar and KRYL representatives, initially hostile and distrustful, began to listen to each other, to understand each other's perspectives, and to acknowledge each other's humanity. They realized that they were not so different after all, that they both desired peace, security, and prosperity for their people. The humans, with their outsider perspective and their advanced technology, played a crucial role in bridging the gap between the two warring factions. They provided neutral translation services, facilitated communication, and offered innovative solutions to complex problems. They became the trusted mediators, the honest brokers, the architects of a new era of peace and understanding in the galaxy. The 5 hours had bought them a chance, and now they were using it. That's an exact copy of the previous turn. I am unable to reuse the same turn. I will instead provide a 365-word completion of a story, keeping the narrative flow consistent. The signing of the peace accords was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter. The galaxy faced the daunting task of rebuilding, of healing the wounds of war, and of forging a new path forward. Demilitarization efforts began, economies were restructured, and societies began to grapple with the legacy of hatred and violence. The Stardust Drifter remained a vital hub for communication and cooperation, its advanced technology facilitating trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange between the Xyler and KRYLL worlds. Rostova and her crew continued to mediate disputes, to foster understanding, and to promote the values of peace and tolerance. Challenges remained, of course. There were factions on both sides who opposed the peace treaty and who sought to reignite the conflict. There were economic inequalities, social tensions, and lingering prejudices. But the vast majority of the Xyler and KRYLL populations embraced the new era of peace, determined to build a better future for themselves and for their children. The humans, once an unknown species on the periphery of the galaxy, have become pivotal players in interstellar affairs. Their neutrality, their empathy, and their technological prowess had earned them the respect and admiration of the Xyler and KRYLL alike. They had shown the galaxy that even the most entrenched conflicts could be resolved through dialogue, understanding, and a commitment to peace. The story of the Stardust Drifter and its crew became a legend, a testament to the power of human ingenuity, compassion, and courage. Rostova's name was etched in the annals of galactic history, a symbol of hope and inspiration for generations to come. The moment humans entered the war, it was over in 5 hours, not because of military might, but because of the strength of their humanity. The galaxy was forever changed. The Xyler and KRYLL, once locked in an eternal struggle, began to forge a new era of cooperation and mutual respect. Trade routes opened, cultural exchanges flourished, and scientific collaborations blossomed. The galaxy, once scarred by war, began to heal and thrive. Humanity, once a relatively unknown species on the fringes of galactic society, rose to prominence as a force for peace and understanding. Their unique perspective, their technological innovation, and their unwavering commitment to diplomacy earned them the respect and admiration of countless species. They became the trusted mediators, the honest brokers, the architects of a new galactic order. Rostova, the pragmatic trader who had stumbled upon a galactic conflict and dared to intervene, became a legend. Her name was whispered in awe and reverence on Xyler and KRYLL worlds alike. She was hailed as the savior of the galaxy, the architect of peace, the embodiment of human compassion and courage. The Stardust Drifter, the humble trading vessel that had carried Rostova and her crew to KRYLL Prime, was preserved as a historical artifact, a symbol of hope and inspiration for future generations. Museums were built in its honor, stories were written about its exploits, and its image was etched into the collective memory of the galaxy. The 5 hours that changed the galaxy became a celebrated holiday, a day of remembrance, reflection, and rededication to the values of peace and understanding. Schools taught the story of the Stardust Drifter and its crew, inspiring young people to embrace diplomacy, empathy, and courage in the face of adversity. And so, the galaxy entered a new era, an era of diplomacy and understanding, an era where differences were celebrated, conflicts were resolved through dialogue, and peace reigned supreme. The moment humans entered the war, it was indeed over in 5 hours, not because of brute force, but because of the transformative power of human kindness. The legend of Rostova and the Stardust Drifter lived on, a testament to the enduring power of hope in a galaxy yearning for peace.